Fiona stepped out of the portal, her eyes closed, a soft smile gracing her lips. In an instant, the entire hall fell silent. The most powerful and influential men in the room turned their attention to her, drawn to her presence like moths to a flame. One by one, they approached, eager to greet her. Among them, Liu Wanan's eyes widened in shock. She instinctively covered her mouth, unable to believe what she was seeing. She's breathtaking, like a goddess from a fairy tale. Meanwhile, Dong Shangyi remained composed. His eyes reflected calmness, yet there was a sharp glint as he studied Fiona in silence. Crossing his arms, he turned to Liu Wanan with a smirk. If you carried yourself with more presence, you could compete with Fiona's beauty. Liu Wanan's heart skipped a beat. She placed a hand on her chest, her face flushing red as she turned away. Is he serious? He thinks I could compare to Fiona? Fiona wasn't just any woman. She was the daughter of the president of the World Martial Arts Association, a woman of unparalleled status, beauty, and influence. Trying to compose herself, Liu Wanan forced a smile and playfully teased, "Why don't you try winning over Fiona? You're one of the brightest talents of the Eastern Dragon Kingdom. Surely you could catch her interest?" At her words, Dong Shangyi paused. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. Then, with a forced chuckle, he waved his hand. "Don't joke like that. There are plenty of men here who outshine me. Compared to them, I'm just someone who's barely stepped out of the shadows. And besides, I have no interest in getting beaten again." Liu Wanan's eyes sparkled with amusement. She rested a finger on her cheek, recalling a particular moment from the past. "Speaking of getting beaten," she mused, "I heard your brother also got destroyed by Lu Ying. Now he just avoids fights altogether. Maybe we should go comfort him, swap stories about how it feels to be humiliated by the same guy?" Dong Shangyi sighed, closing his eyes. But the moment he did, memories surged back. A familiar saw himself, bloodied and exhausted, kneeling on the ground. Across from him, Lu Ying stood tall, a smirk on his face, completely unfazed. A bitter realization settled over him. In the Dong family, we had two outstanding talents, and both of us were beaten by the same man, our future brother-in-law. Fate was cruel, because whether he wanted to admit it or not, there was no man more worthy of his sister than Lu Ying. Meanwhile, at the grand banquet, the marshals of the army sat together, enjoying a lavish feast. The Western marshal swirled his wine, taking a slow sip before speaking. Cumberland's daughter, the president of the World Martial Arts Association. Her lineage, her talent, her beauty. Wouldn't she make a perfect match for the future god of war? Beside him, the northern marshal chuckled, lifting his glass in agreement. Behind them, Fiona stood surrounded by admirers. The marshal of the central district, who had been listening quietly, took a sip of wine before finally speaking. "It's worth considering," he admitted. "After all, wedding gifts are never too many." But then, his expression darkened. Placing his glass down, he said firmly, "Actually, I disagree." The table fell silent. Our great country has billions of people. Surely, among them, we can find an exceptional woman worthy of our god of war. Blindly worshipping foreigners is nothing but a waste of time and respect. His words carried unshakable authority. The marshal of the West narrowed his eyes slightly, swirling the wine in his glass. "That man from the Leon Kingdom, Cumberland, he's trying to take advantage of this situation." He tapped his fingers against the table, deep in thought. If he remembered correctly, Lu Ying already had someone in the army who interested him, and more importantly, she was from the Dong family. There was no need to push him toward Fiona. The Marshal of the North smiled knowingly. The two marshals raised their glasses and took a sip, silently deciding that this topic was not worth discussing any further. Later that evening, Fiona sat at a table, exhaustion evident in her expression. Her eyes lacked their usual brilliance, dimmed by the weight of the evening. Resting her head on her hand, she gazed at the floor, her mind wandering with regret. Why did I even come to this party? Beside her, a woman with brown hair reached out and gently touched Fiona's hand. With a warm smile, she spoke, "You are the pearl of the world, Fiona. And when pearls shine, people admire them." Fiona sighed softly. "They don't admire me," she muttered. "They just want to possess me." She knew the truth, her beauty, her status, that's all people saw. It was never about her. The woman's eyes gleamed with confidence. Leaning in, she asked casually, "In the end, you're going to have to get married. Has Mr. Cumberland not spoken to you about this?" Fiona's exhaustion deepened. She sighed again and shook her head. "My father told me it would be best to find my ideal partner before this party ends. If I don't, I may not get the chance to choose for myself." The woman's expression turned serious, her gaze locked onto Fiona. An event like this, filled with the world's most outstanding geniuses, only happens once every 10 years. You should follow your father's will. In this era, a woman's youth and beauty do not last forever. Fiona's heart tightened. Her eyes widened slightly as she placed her hand on her chin, scanning the room. She knew it. She had no other choice. If she didn't choose now, someone else would choose for her. Her gaze shifted toward another table. There, sitting calmly, eating without a care in the world, was a young man. "That one," Fiona muttered, pointing toward him. The brown-haired woman followed her gaze. It was Lu Ying. At that moment, Lu Ying was simply enjoying his meal, using his fork to cut into a perfectly cooked steak. But to Fiona, he was perfect, her ideal partner. Lu Ying's expression changed. An uneasy feeling crept over him. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. Someone was watching him. Slowly, he looked up and locked eyes with Fiona. His gaze lingered on her, his mind spinning. What is going on? The brown-haired woman beside Fiona let out a playful laugh. She stood up, touching her lips with her finger, her eyes filled with amusement. "Lu Ying is just as stunning as you, Fiona. If you don't want him, I'll go flirt with him myself." Fiona's eyes widened. "Wait, I never said I didn't want him." Her face flushed red, and she stood up abruptly. Lu Ying finished his meal and set his knife down, sighing in satisfaction. But when he looked up again, Fiona was walking toward him. Her arms were held behind her back, her movements hesitant yet deliberate. Her gaze remained fixed on him. Lu Ying's entire body tensed. His eyes widened with alertness and confusion. Why is she coming toward me? His mind raced. He had heard the marshals talking earlier. He knew who she was. Fiona, the daughter of Cumberland, the president of the World Martial Arts Association. His hands clenched slightly as a cold realization hit him. Cumberland is one of the most powerful martial saints on the planet. He shut his eyes for a brief moment. No, I'll just ignore her. There's no way she's interested in me. It's just a coincidence. He had never taken the army elder's jokes about him marrying Fiona seriously. It was absurd. He already had Dongqing. He had no reason to get involved with the so-called flower of the alliance. Fiona approached Lu Ying, her gaze bright with excitement. Trying to flirt, she leaned in slightly and asked with a playful smile, "You've tasted all the food at the banquet, right? Any recommendations?" Lu Ying opened his eyes, his expression cold. "Everything is delicious." Fiona, however, wasn't going to give up so easily. Seeing that he was barely paying attention, she changed tactics. With a teasing smile, she subtly adjusted her posture, leaning in just enough to draw attention. "Then tell me," she asked in a soft, lilting voice, "which dish did you like the most?" For a brief moment, her plan worked. Lu Ying's eyes flickered toward her, widening slightly in surprise, but only for a second. Realizing the trap, he immediately looked away, shutting his eyes as if to clear his thoughts. Then, without looking at her, he pointed at the dessert table. The cake! Fiona's attention instantly shifted. She turned toward the dessert, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Cake? Without hesitation, she picked up a fork, sliced a piece, and placed it into her mouth. The moment the rich, sweet flavor melted on her tongue, her eyes lit up. A smile spread across her lips. This is amazing." Glanced at her briefly, but showed no emotion. He wasn't falling for her charms. While Fiona was trying to win over Lu Ying, two mysterious figures had their eyes on him. A man and a woman wearing glasses. The same people who had been on the beach before. The man studied Lu Ying intently, his brows furrowing. He's strong, very strong, and young. But which faction does he belong to? The woman rested a hand on her waist, observing him in silence. The man exhaled, closing his eyes as if coming to terms with something. This world is full of monstrous geniuses. New faces emerge constantly. If you don't keep up, you fall behind. The woman crossed her arms, a trace of concern in her expression. You're right. At this rate, even the strongest martial saints could be dethroned. Just then, her eyes widened in surprise. She turned toward the man beside her, her expression curious. Wait, are you saying Lu Ying is really still alive? The man pointed toward a distant part of the banquet. With a serious look, he asked, Didn't you notice? This time, even the veteran experts of the army have come. Her brows knitted together. He continued, In previous editions, the army only sent young rising stars. It was meant to test the new generation and help them compete for a share of the subsequent crystal. The woman remained silent, listening carefully. The man's voice dropped lower. But this time, it's different. The veterans are here. They're fighting for themselves. They're paving the way for Lu Ying to become the next martial saint of the army. So without a doubt, he's still alive. The woman's attention turned toward the marshals, who were casually drinking and conversing. She smiled faintly. You're right, but it's a shame Lu Ying didn't come to this summit. The man gave her a knowing look. If Lu Ying were here, this year's World Congress would be a done deal. The Eastern Dragon Kingdom would dominate the subsequent crystal. The woman turned back toward him, intrigued. When do you think he'll reach the level of a martial saint? The man pulled a cigarette from his lips, exhaled slowly, and hesitated. Apart from Lu Ying himself, no one knows. The woman's expression shifted. A flicker of fear appeared in her eyes as she gazed downward, deep in thought. If Lu Ying at level 8 was already able to defeat the martial saint of the Extreme Dojo, then what happens when he reaches level 9? A terrifying realization struck her. Could he become invincible? Before she could dwell on it, the man's expression changed. His eyes widened in rage, and his body trembled. You're underestimating the martial saints, he snapped. Clenching his fists, he growled. I won't deny that Lu Ying is strong. But for the next 100 years, the number 1 of the Eastern Dragon Kingdom can only be our lord. A slow smile spread across his face as martial energy surged from his body. His voice boomed. Not even the extreme martial saint could surpass our lord, nor the transcendental martial saint, and certainly not Lu Ying. Hours later, as the sun began to rise, golden light bathed the castle in warmth. The party was still ongoing, but Lu Ying had already made his decision. With a calm smile, he quietly stepped outside. Leaving midway through the event, he walked away without hesitation.